Good morning. Welcome to everyone here and everyone online. Our script reading is from Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 8 to 14. So Ecclesiastes chapter 12, starting in verse 8. Really starts on a high note. So starting in verse 8. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher started to find out just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So I've been taking a course on economics as part of at the university. It's an online course, so that's basically my Saturday mornings now, because I do online stuff, watch videos, read the textbook. The textbooks now are interactive. Nothing's paper anymore. So you read the textbook and you read the chapter, and it's got videos that play, and they explain topics and have little animations and stuff. It's pretty good. And when I read these things and start learning these concepts of economics, it's a lot of theory and a lot of stuff that's relatively new to me, but a lot of it makes sense. Like if anybody here was to read it, they'd be like, oh yeah, obviously that's the way the world works kind of thing with money and people buying and selling things. But we have these quizzes every couple of weeks. And I was thinking that when I did those lessons for that particular quiz that I was going to do, is like, this stuff's pretty easy. Like, I'm reading the theory. It's no big deal. I'm reading it over and over again. I'm kind of getting bored watching these videos and sitting through them. So I just jumped right into the quiz. So I thought, okay, this quiz will be simple. I tanked the quiz. That's probably the worst I've done on a quiz. I ran out of time. I was kind of panicking at the end. I had like 3 questions left to go, because I didn't do very well, which is really kind of, weird. Like, usually I'm pretty good at that sort of stuff. I can do these quizzes and it's not that big of a deal, but I just tanked it. It was terrible. I think I was like 20% under the average for the class. So anyway, the thing that I learned from this was that I got to practice. You can learn these theories, you can listen to this stuff and read it, and it can all make a lot of sense, but you have to practice. You have to go back and practice these things. This particular quiz had some calculations, which again were really easy. It was just kind of addition and, adding things up, but I still didn't do very well. And, I'm an engineer. That's kind of embarrassing. I'm the guy who does calculations all day, every day. And didn't do well because I didn't practice. And I learned and recognized, and I've always known this, I just didn't do it for this time, is that we have to really practice things to truly understand it. Benjamin Franklin had a quote on this. It's pretty interesting. He says, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." Just hearing words and understanding theory to the point where you're just kind of reading it and saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're not truly learning it. You're not truly understanding what the concepts are in a lot of cases. This idea of practice equals true understanding. And that's what we have to understand as we read Solomon's final statement in this book of Ecclesiastes. This is our 12th lesson, and it's our last lesson in Ecclesiastes. We've come right to the end of this thing. And if you've seen Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, this is essentially the final answer. This is the one he's locking in. This is the answer. This is it. On his last verse in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. In these last 7 verses that we're looking at, we find a restatement of the result of the preacher's search for meaning. Solomon was writing the book of Ecclesiastes. He's kind of going through this idea of what are we here for? What is the meaning of life? What are we doing while we're spending time on this earth? And he comes to his final answer. This conclusion describes the preacher's continuing work, so Solomon's continuing work. He talks about the value of wisdom and the right kind of wisdom. He actually warns us against the wrong kind of study in this last little conclusion section that he has. And he has this final grand conclusion, this final statement of Ecclesiastes, which really sums up the whole book as far as the search for the meaning and purpose of life. So let's go through this. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 12, and we'll look at these last several verses in this passage where Solomon is saying his final answer. He wants to kind of lock this in and saying, this is what I found. This is what I discovered. So Ecclesiastes 12:8, he's essentially restating the theme in this passage. In your versions of the Bible, you may have this as part of the previous section If you don't know, the Bible is written, it didn't have these little subheadings. I know in mine says the conclusion of the matter after verse 8 and the beginning of verse 9. Those little headings aren't in the original texts. Those were put in later. But really, verse 8 goes along with this section here in a lot of ways. He's restating this theme. And again, as we studied Ecclesiastes through these last 12 lessons, we hear this term a lot. Ecclesiastes 12:8, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. And again, your version may have vanity, vanity, says the teacher. Everything is vanity. Same idea of, things are meaningless. Things don't have any point in that respect. That's kind of what he's talking about in the statement, with an understanding that this statement has to be remembered in its context. This theme is repeated throughout the book, but as we read this theme and this idea of everything being meaningless, we have to understand in what context is everything meaningless. So we're going to go back to Ecclesiastes 1. Go back to the first chapter. This again is where he's saying the same thing again. And he clarifies it in this passage. And he really clarifies what he's talking about when he says everything is meaningless, everything is vanity. Ecclesiastes 1, verses 2 to 3. So Ecclesiastes 1, starting in verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? He's referring to the vanity or meaninglessness of life under the sun while we are on this earth. There is a lot of meaningless on this earth while we're on this earth, and that's the context in which he's framing this statement. When life is viewed solely from an earthly perspective, when God and the afterlife are not taken into the equation, everything truly is meaningless. Without God in your life, everything is meaningless. Going through all the things that we go through in this life, we have pleasures and we have struggles. We go through good things and bad things. These things are meaningless when you're not viewing that big picture, that big understanding of what's really going on. When focused on only what happens on this earth, things are meaningless. We can accomplish many things on this earth, and you might accomplish great things that really influence your community and your society, and those are all really good things to do. We have to understand that those things probably will be forgotten, though. Maybe not this generation, but maybe 5, 6, 7 generations from now. Everything on this earth that we do is kind of framed as being limited to on this earth. And again, as we studied in these past 12 weeks, or I guess 11, 12 if you include today, we can see how a lot of these things are going to be forgotten. And these things that we do really don't have a lot of meaning beyond what happens beyond this earth. When it's framed solely in the perspective of the earth, it is meaningless. Where does it leave us if we do a lot of these things? When we work hard, we do many things. We understand that sometimes life isn't fair and things are going to pass us on. We have to involve God in our lives if we want things to have meaning. So without an understanding of the big picture, it is meaningless. Life is meaningless under the sun or on this earth. And when we involve God in our lives, we can understand there's more beyond this life. And we can store up treasures in heaven. When we fear God and keep his commandments, this might be a little bit of a spoiler for the last verse in the passage, but when we fear God and keep his commandments, we are going to benefit for all eternity beyond this earth, and then we can have meaning on this life. And we can also better enjoy our time while we are under the sun. Again, that's another theme that's been repeated through Ecclesiastes. He's saying everything's meaningless under the sun, but when you understand that all these blessings come from God, you can truly enjoy the time that you do have here. So life is under the sun is meaningless in that respect. If life under the sun or things on this earth is all there is, it truly is meaningless. We have to understand that big picture. So we keep going in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. We can see that he continued teaching others from the next few verses. We'll look at verses 9 and 10 of chapter 12. Solomon in this passage is showing how he continued to teach others. He continued to seek knowledge, truth, and righteousness. Verses 9 and 10. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. If you go to 1 Kings chapter 4, this really sounds like Solomon. If we look at Solomon's life, Randy did a lesson a few weeks ago on Solomon's life and really got into that, which is really good. This idea of the teacher being wise and imparting knowledge to other people really summed up what Solomon was doing. 1 Kings 4, and we look at verses 29 to 34. We can see some of the things Solomon was doing. You can also see where Solomon got his wisdom from. So 1 Kings 4, verses 29 to 34. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. This passage goes on to talk about the Queen of Sheba coming and discussing things with Solomon as well. So it really shows that Solomon was spreading his knowledge to other people. He had this knowledge imparted to him by God, this wisdom and knowledge. We can see that it was wisdom and knowledge in this passage as well. He had a lot of knowledge of the natural world and the way things work. And he was spreading that knowledge and sharing it with other people. It's interesting to note that his conclusion about life's vanity, the previous verse where he's saying meaningless, meaningless, everything's utterly meaningless, you might think that that will drive you to do nothing in this world, but it didn't do that with Solomon. It didn't drive him to despair and inactivity. He still recognized that what we do on this earth may not last in a physical sense when we view just earth in that very limited form. But with God in our lives, we can enjoy this time that we have under the sun. We can truly appreciate what God has blessed us with and act upon it. Solomon acted upon the blessing that he had in getting that wisdom and knowledge from God, and he taught other people. He wrote the Proverbs. He wrote Ecclesiastes that we're studying, that we're learning from. He really understood that we have these blessings, and if you're viewing earth from simply a physical sense, it is meaningless that we do here, but if you involve God in it, it's not meaningless. And it shouldn't drive us to inactivity. We should make sure that we still use those blessings to the best of our ability that God has blessed us with. And we can truly understand this as well when we practice it too. When we recognize the blessings that we have, we can practice those things and truly understand how to enjoy life with God in our lives. We keep reading, Ecclesiastes 12. We look at verses 11 and the first part of verse 12. The previous verses talked about Solomon being wise and giving knowledge to other people. And now he's clarifying words of the wise being of great value, of having this understanding, this mind of learning and seeking the truth is of great value. But also clarifies that it has to be the right kind of study. Ecclesiastes 12, starting in verse 11. Says, the words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. So very interesting. Keep your bookmark in Ecclesiastes 12. Go to Hebrews chapter 4. He says in here, the words of the wise are like goads. I'm pretty sure most of us don't have a goad at home. You know what a goad is. I actually knew, but I looked it up anyway just to make sure I understand what he was talking about. And it's basically a sharp spiked stick used for driving cattle. Poke the cattle and move them where you want to go. If you go to Hebrews 4, verse 12, there's a New Testament passage that talks about this same theme, the same idea. So Hebrews 4, verse 12. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. The words of the wise are like goads. They're like that sharp stick poking the cattle. I know we have these little hairless guinea pigs at home. Call them skinny pigs. Cute little animals. At least I think they're cute. Some people don't. But I don't know. We don't poke them with sharp sticks. Trust me, that's not a good thing to do. But we use our finger to kind of poke them to move them where we want to go. We give them a treat. One of the pigs likes to come out of his cage and kind of walk around the house and stuff, which is okay. You got to watch where you step. But he'll come out and he'll beg for a treat. So we give him a little treat. And he sits there and he starts to eat it, but we poke him with our finger to get him to move on the carpet, just because pigs don't know where the bathroom is, right? So you poke them there so they sit on the carpet and eat the treat there. We also have skinny pig races. So we have 2 pigs. We put them at the end of the house, and then they race. They kind of make this little kind of chirping sound as they run, burp, 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 as they run down the hall. And we poke them with our fingers to try to get them to go the right way. Those are goads. That's the same idea of goading something along. Again, we're not using sharp sticks. I want to point that out. It's very clear. Just use our finger. It's very gentle. But this idea of goading, words of the wise being goads. Again, Hebrews 4. The word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. These words urge us by pointing out what we need to do. If you discover that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, or you learn a new piece of knowledge to urge you to action, that's goading you along. This idea of wisdom and understanding goading you along, urging you to act. It also keeps us in line as well. So it urges us to act, gets us to keep going, goads us along, and it also keeps us going down the right path as well. If we continue to study, we're going to stay on that narrow path with those goads of knowledge, keeping us on the right track. This is something that we can understand as being valuable. We understand that having this wisdom and knowledge and practicing it, making sure that we do it on a regular basis, it's going to goad us along down the right path. Back in Ecclesiastes 12, you don't have to go there, but he talks about their collected sayings being like firmly embedded nails. If you go to Matthew 7, they're like goads that urge us along. And then kind of in contrast to that, they're like nails that can provide stability in our lives. They're collected sayings like firmly embedded nails. This idea that this wisdom, this knowledge can ground us, can really give us that stable foundation to understand what we should be doing and help us weather the storms of life. Matthew 7, verses 24 to 27. This is Jesus talking in this passage, and he has, again, a similar teaching. Matthew 7, starting in verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Nails are one way of keeping grounded. If you're in a hurricane place and you don't nail your house down, it's going to blow away. That's kind of a normal thing, a natural thing to understand. This idea of understanding God's wisdom can keep us grounded, can help us weather those storms of life. When we go through those difficult times in our lives, again, as we saw through Ecclesiastes, there's a lot of things that are going to be unfair, that we're not going to understand, that are going to be very difficult to live through. When we're firmly embedded with the knowledge that God has given us, we can weather those storms. We can get through those difficult times, and we are going to have that firm foundation to rely upon that comes from God. We go back to Ecclesiastes 12. We'll look at the second part of verse 12. I'm actually going to read all of verse 12. This does go together and very, very valuable. Actually, I'm going to read verse 11 too. All of it together. So Ecclesiastes 12, starting in verse 11. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. With the internet now, you can probably understand there's a lot of garbage information out there. Like in verse 11 where he says, the words of the wise are like goads, they're collecting sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. That shows the source of this wisdom, of where it should come from, where we should understand where our information should come from. There's a meme that was online that I thought was kind of funny. It's a picture of Abraham Lincoln, really distinguished, and the words beside his face. There's a little picture. It says, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet." Abraham Lincoln said this, right? So obviously, we shouldn't believe everything we read on the internet. If it's a printed word that we see online, take it at kind of face value and understand that the source might not be correct. We have to recognize that the things that we read, the things that we study, it's always good to study things and read things out and see where people's perspectives are, but really understand what the source is. The internet is a really good place to find any sort of information to back up your pre-existing belief or any sort of belief out there. You can probably find something that'll back up what you want to prove, whether that thing is correct or not correct. And there's a lot of that stuff that's out there. So we really have to be careful of the source of our information. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon's saying that this wisdom, the words of the wise, are given by one shepherd. We have to go back to the right source. We have to go back to the Bible and understand that that is the bottom line. Again, a lot of studies out there. There's a lot of commentaries written by people that are really good that help explain what the scriptures are saying. But again, take that with a bit of a grain of salt and understand that it's what the Bible says is what matters and not necessarily what some other person says that matters. We have to make sure that we understand this. And that's what he's warning about in this passage. Of making many books, there is no end, and much study wearies the body. And again, there's a lot of information out there that may not be correct, and we have to be discerning in what we're studying and what we're reading and what we are filling our minds with that knowledge. We have to make sure that we're selective and follow the one shepherd. Follow the shepherd that is in the scriptures and what God's word is, and follow that as the bottom line. Okay, we come to the final answer. Go to Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. This is Solomon's grand conclusion. If you go to Ecclesiastes and you hear Ecclesiastes quoted, this is often the verse that's been quoted. I've used this passage a lot in lessons throughout the years as being a very good verse to really sum up how we should live our lives. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. He's summing it up. This is his final answer. This is what he says. If you go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon here has taken everything into conclusion. He says, now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. And again, over the last 11 weeks, this is the 12th, we've studied all of the different things that Solomon has said to kind of back this up, showing how the things that we do on this life are going to be temporary. We really have to have a view on the big picture and keep God as a part of our life as we live our lives. When we do that, we can truly enjoy life. And he has taken everything into consideration, not just from what is observed under the sun, but also that big picture. And this is the conclusion of the whole matter. In Ecclesiastes 2, when we look at verse 3, this is the start of the book where he's really showing what he's searching for in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 3. It says, I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. He's searching for the answer for men's search to meaning. It's something that he was looking for, and the reason he's writing this book, so that we can better understand why we are supposed to live on this earth, or how we are supposed to live on this earth. Man's reason for being, his prime directive for his existence, is the whole duty of man to do this. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. So we look at the first part of that. He says, fear God. If you go to Proverbs 9 and verse 10, I think if he says, this is the duty of all mankind, and it's the conclusion of the matter, we'll look at each little element of what he's telling us is the conclusion of the matter. Very important. First part of it is to fear God. It's been said before, when we say fear God, it's not cowering in fear, it's revering God, understanding his position of power, the creator of the universe, the one shepherd that we should be listening to. We have to hold him in awe. When we do that, if you look at Proverbs 9 and verse 10, we can see that this is the beginning of that wisdom and knowledge that we can start to go down that journey in our lives and truly understanding what he's telling us. Proverbs 9 and verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You're essentially recognizing that God is the one who knows everything, and then you can better understand the importance of what he's saying. You can recognize that he's the true source. Again, if you're looking on the internet, scrolling through Google or YouTube or whatever, and trying to find information on something, if you're smart about it, you're going to want to know what the source is. And if you find a source, you're going to see if the source is reputable, if the source has kind of standing or they're an authority on that subject that you're trying to learn. It's the way things should be. I know a lot of people don't do that. That's the way things should be. It's the same way when we're basing our life on studying the Bible. We have to make sure that we understand where it's coming from. We have to revere God and understand where this information is coming from and understand it's coming from the creator of the universe. We have to hold him in awe and revere him. When we do that, that is the source, the beginning of true understanding, is understanding that the source is reliable and can be relied upon. The second part of what Solomon says, he says, fear God and keep his commandments. Look at 1 John chapter 2. This is a theme that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar as we read through the scriptures, is a very common theme. Follow God, keep his commandments. Listen to what he's saying and do it. It's given to the Israelites in the past, all through the Old Testament and also into the New Testament as well. When we do this, again, it's both of those elements. We saw when Jesus had that, was talking about the wise man building his house on the rock, he's talking about hearing the words of him and putting them into practice. You have to understand that it's those two parts. Again, like I was taking my economics class, I heard the words, I understand the concepts, it all makes a lot of sense. That might happen on a Sunday. You're like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, really, really good. But you have to do it. You have to put it into practice to truly understand it. 1 John 2, starting in verse 3. So 1 John chapter 2, starting in verse 3. We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, the love of God is truly made complete in them. We can only truly understand God's message when we do put it into practice. And that's what Solomon is saying. Fear God and keep his commandments. Keeping his commandments has both of those elements in it. We have to understand what his commandments are, and we have to put it into practice. We have to do it. That, again, is being taught in the New Testament as well. This passage in 1 John is one of many that teaches that concept. And I really like it how it says that we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. That's only how we really understand what God's message is and what Jesus' message is if we truly put it into practice in our lives. I thought I knew how to do my quiz, but I didn't because I didn't practice. And we can only truly understand God and his message and Jesus and his love when we put it into practice, when we actually do it. To reverently obey God, to fear him and keep his commandments, when we do that, that is the purpose of life. When we do that, that's the key to true happiness. That'll give us that meaning in life that we have. We'll understand what the big picture is and truly understand how we can live this life to the best of our ability and to the fullest and with the most joy. He continues in verse 14 with the basis of his conclusion. This is again where he throws a bit of reality at us. To again hopefully drive home how important this all is. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 14. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Again, that same theme is carried throughout the New Testament. And he gives us the reason this is the best thing to do while we are on this earth. The things that we do on this earth do matter. He says meaningless, everything is meaningless throughout the book. But he's really showing that it is meaningless if we just have that narrow perspective of earthly things. When we recognize the big picture and recognize that God is involved in this whole thing as well, and it involves our spiritual life after this also, what we do on this earth does matter. We have to understand that God is going to be judging what we do on our time while we are on this earth. We have to fear him. We have to keep his commandments. When we do that, we can live a life that has that peace. We can truly understand how to enjoy life. We can understand how to store up those treasures in heaven and appreciate our blessings while we are on this earth. So people have often searched for that meaning of life. They ask questions like, why am I here? What is my purpose in life? What is the meaning of life? That's been talked about a lot throughout all time, essentially. And Solomon, with his own experiences and his God-given wisdom, he gives us his final answer to these questions. Life from an earthly perspective alone is truly meaningless. But by fearing God and keeping his commandments, we can endure the fairness of life while enjoying the good things in life, the blessings that come from God. We can store up those treasures in heaven when we understand that we need to fear God and keep his commandments. If you go to John 10, in the second part of verse 10, this is the verse we're going to close with. This is another verse that kind of resonates in my mind as kind of I live my life, and especially if you see things that are unfair, And you understand that life can be enjoyed. When you start to feel a little bit down with whatever situation you're in, you have to understand that God wants us to have a good life. And really in Ecclesiastes, he's telling us how to do that. He's telling us how to enjoy the things that we have, the things that we have been blessed with. John chapter 10 and verse 10, the second part of it. This is Jesus talking. He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And that's a verse that pops in my mind quite a bit. When we understand that God can be involved in our life, and when he is involved in our lives, then we can truly enjoy this life that we have while we are on this earth. When we don't have him in our life, then that's when everything is meaningless. Everything is vanity. But when we do understand that we should fear him and keep his commandments, we can store up those treasures in heaven. It's going to matter throughout eternity. And we can also enjoy the time that we do have under the sun. I'd like to offer an invitation. If anyone has not yet accepted Jesus on as their Lord, we can show you in the scriptures how to do that. And if you are struggling in any way, again, please make your needs known, and we'd like to help in any way that we can.